It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Neefeld from GSL. He'll be running this presentation and he'll introduce our speakers. Go ahead, Dan.
All right, thanks, Mike, and good morning, everyone. As Mike mentioned, I'm Daniel Neefeld. I'm here at the Global Systems Lab in Boulder. I've been at GSL for about 8 years after spending 15 years as the SU at WFO Omaha, where we were really heavily involved in some of the early hazard services testing efforts. I'm the division chief at GSL, where this work is taking place, and we're really thrilled to have the opportunity to showcase this latest version of hazard services with you. And just wanted to emphasize that this is mainly just focused on the capabilities of hazard services for issuing tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings. There's obviously a lot of additional information about hazard services for what else it does. And I know you all have hazard services now, so you're familiar with it. So this will just mainly focus on those new capabilities that are starting to roll out. And if you go to the next slide, please. I want to just highlight our team. Really proud of our amazing team. We've got about 20 people at GSL who contribute to the hazard services development and testing efforts. I mean, that's just at GSL. There's actually a lot of people at Signal Processing and across the Weather Service that help out as well. It's no small task to replace all 3 of our watch, warning, and advisory systems with one new one. But we're really happy with this latest version that you're about to see. I want to just point out and introduce a few people on the team. Dr. Emily Schlie, she wrote a lot of code that you'll be seeing. She's going to cover the majority of the material and go through the demo. She's currently leading a lot of our hazard services development, has her PhD in meteorology from the University of Illinois, and she's been at GSL for about 3 years after spending some time at MDL out of grad school. So again, you'll be hearing mostly from Emily today. We also have Taylor Trogdon on. He'll be helping out Emily with a lot of the operational considerations and questions that you might have. He started out at WFO Aberdeen, then went to WFO Memphis, then the Hurricane Center before coming to GSL about 3.5 years ago. And he leads a lot of our national center development efforts. Still a warning forecaster at heart. So like I say, he'll contribute when we get into some of the Q&A. Also have Nate Harden on. Nate's been heavily involved in hazard services for a little over 8 years at GSL, also coming from the Hurricane Center, and before that, WFO Anchorage. He's the branch chief for the hazard services development work that we have. Also going to mention Jim Raymer. A lot of you may have heard of Jim Raymer. He's been around for a long time, and he developed the original Warren Gen that you all use now back in AWIPS 1, back in the 90s when it first came out. And he's been really involved in our hazard services development for these efforts as too. And then Dr. Daryl Kingfield. A lot of you know Daryl. He's been leading a lot of the hazard services development prior to Emily. For about the 5 years prior to that. So a lot of what you'll see today is from the hard work and genius status of Daryl. I also wanted to point out, I know Doug Tilley, I saw Doug's on from St. Louis, and Doug's been really instrumental lately with helping test the ATAN that has the convective workflows. So thanks to Doug, and again, there's lots of other people that have been helping out. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily from here. I also want to mention that Emily's internet is a little shaky at times, so we are hoping that she will last through the presentation, but if not, we'll go to plan B. But go ahead, Emily, and you can take it.
Hey. Hello, thank you for that introduction, Dan. As mentioned, I'm Emily Schlie. I'm currently the Hazard Services Program Manager. So we want to give a little brief overview of hazard services and the storm track tool and kind of what's different a bit before we get into the actual demo itself. And as Dan mentioned, hazard services has a big job of replacing and combining 3 different tools in WarnGen, GHG, and RiverPro. And I want to get into a little bit about what's similar between the StormTrack tool and WarnGen. I know it's a little intimidating going to a different tool from one that's been so well received and used for so long. The differences are not hair-raising. You'll actually see that the StormTrack tool looks and feels very similar to WarnGen. That's done intentionally to ease workflow transition. You're going to notice that there's still a track button. Hatched area selection still functions similarly. You can still switch between point and line of storms with 1 click. Duration selection will still change the warning polygon size. So there's a lot of similarities between the StormTrack tool and Convective Hazard Services and WarnGen. There are a lot of differences, and we'll get into those later, but hopefully those are all positive differences for everyone. So I wanted to go to this graphic. So one of these is the StormTrack tool, and one of these is WarnGen. So I wanted to get a little bit of audience participation and feedback here and see if people can guess which one is the StormTrack tool and which one is WarnGen before I reveal which is which. So either maybe just throw it in the comments or something if you want to take a stab. And Doug, you're not allowed to do this. You have too much experience. All right, we got some feedback. All right. You are correct. You successfully guessed it. So the right is the StormTrack tool, the left is WarnGen. There are some pretty subtle differences that you'll be able to notice, like with the StormTrack tool, there are dots along the track rather than just lines. You also notice the labels are colored instead of white. That's configurable, I want to point out right away. So there are differences, but our goal was to really have this look and feel similar to WarnGen going out into things. I also wanted to point out the differences and similarities between the StormTrack tool and WarnGen for the GUIs that will come along with them. So the right is WarnGen, the left is what we call the hazard information dialog. And this is after you launch the StormTrack tool and drag your dot to a storm, this is what will pop up and let you control what ends up in your product later. And WarnGen on the right, the difference I want to point out here is that the HID it's a lot cleaner, so to speak, in terms of selections. On the right with WarnGen, there's a lot of scrolling. I couldn't fit the whole thing on this image, of course, but you are all familiar with WarnGen, so I don't need to. But you have to scroll down. You have all your choices given to you at the same time. With hazard services, we have what we like to call like dynamic choices or smart choices, where what you select as you go through the HID is going to allow more options to appear for selection based on what you selected previously. So you don't have everything presented to you at once. And the hope is that that makes things a little less confusing and a little bit more streamlined and easy to go through. So you're not having to search through everything for exactly what you want. And then zooming in a little bit on that, on the StormTrack tool image and going over what exactly you see here. So you'll notice, again, similarities. We still have our storm location marker. We have our start and our end time, but they are configurable to be different colors. We still have the triangles on the outside on the vertices on our polygon. This X here is our pivot point. So when you're tracking your storm, when you move your dot, this is the point that it's going to rotate around. That's similar in visuals to WarnGen. One thing that is different is you have these little dots that are future point locations, and then your like past markers as well, and they can be different colors. sizes, that's all configurable. Pretty much everything you see right here is configurable in the Storm Track tool. And then what's different between the Storm Track tool and hazard services? One thing is the hazard first paradigm. And I'll go over exactly what I mean by that when I start the demo. But essentially being able to choose what hazard you're working on, essentially before the HID shows up, before you start tracking your storm. Another thing that's new is our first guess storm motion. So in WarnGen, you have a sort of pre-defined storm motion that is applied to every single storm. When you initially drag your dot to a storm, you always get the same polygon, the same storm motion that initially shows up. In hazard services, we're trying to be smarter about this in a way, and we have sort of three options. The first one is that you're going to get a first guess based off of the background radar data. So we're going to try to intelligently give you a storm motion when you first drag your dot. That kind of goes with what is currently happening on radar. The second is if you've recently issued a hazard within the last 15 minutes, that time is configurable, but within the last 15 minutes, if you've recently issued a hazard, your next hazard will adopt that previous motion. And then if for some reason your radar goes out or you haven't recently issued a new hazard, you're going to have a pre-canned like default storm motion, just like WarnGen did. So there's sort of three layers to this first guess storm motion idea. The third thing is multi-hazard management. So now you can change the track, select multiple hazards at the same time, issue all the hazards you have selected at the same time together. So that really opens up a lot of multitasking for a single forecaster. And I'll go through what that looks like as well. We can also propose a warning before issuance. This can help with situational awareness, especially when warnings are crossing CWA boundaries. There are auto polygon updates. This is only for unedited polygons for pending and proposed hazards. If as soon as you make an edit to your polygon, that stops. The track continues to update as new radar data comes in. But if you don't make any edits to your polygon, it is going to sort of follow along with the track as more radar scans come in. Another thing that we added was a speed and bearing readout to the HID. This was something that was asked for at several of our forecaster assessment tests and at our OPG tests, and it was really something that forecasters wanted and asked for, so we added that to the HID, as well as our update SRM button in the HID, which works with our radar display control tool. I'll go through that in more detail in the actual demo. I mentioned before dynamic HID selections or smart call to action statements. There is also a product staging dialog now for partial cancellations of hazards. That was also a forecaster requested thing that came up during the ATN actually. That was very recently added. So it gets rid of basically the last of our frame text that happens for convective hazards. The last thing is partial county alerting. So that is available with this version of hazard services. Just to quickly go through what that means for people that haven't heard of it before. So on the left, you see this image with the green area is the hazard or the threat area, and then the whole hatched area is our county. And without partial county alerting, this entire hatched area is going to get an alert or EAS activation for this entire county. With partial county alerting, we've split this county up into 6 different zones, so to speak, and our threat area only covers 2 of them, and so only those 2 zones are going to get an alert with partial county alerting. So that will be something that's available with hazard services Convective when it becomes operational. I also wanted to quickly point out that for people that are already familiar with what hazard services looks like, especially those that are using it operationally for hydro, like when you see what I'm demoing, you're going to notice that there are differences in the console. There have been a lot of updates between the version of hazard services that everyone is most familiar with and what will come with hazard services Convective. So you'll notice things like the more visible session configuration dropdown. We broke out service backup into its own dropdown. The drawing tools are separated between drawing shape and drawing action. But the biggest change here is probably these clickable filter icons. Previously, these would only just highlight yellow when you had an active hazard in a different setting. Now they're actually clickable. And if you click on one, like if you click on winter weather, it will put you in the winter weather setting. So this is going to make it much easier to click through when you're in warning operations and you want to change from convective to hydro to winter weather, and you want to do it very quickly. The last thing is this quick launch tool button. So this is a very fast way of launching the storm track tool. And it's a one-click way of doing it rather than having to go to tools, go down to storm track tool and launch it. Now there's a one-click option. So these, and I will say, these were all forecaster recommended and requested features, especially the quick launch button that was asked for in several facts, and the filtering status, being able to click on the filter status icons was definitely something that people were pushing for a while that we implemented. So I'm going to get into the demo now. I'm going to bring over my cave that I have loaded up. We're going to be going through a case that pretty sure everyone is familiar with. It's recent, the April 26th case that put the tornado through Elkhorn, Oklahoma. Oh no, Omaha. Sorry. So I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that case. Before we get into actually loading up that radar data, and it will be played back as though it's happening in real time, the way that I have it set up in our container here. But before I start going through the actual data, I wanted to demo a couple of things. The initial one is to just go through a little bit of what's different with hazard services. You'll notice up at the top here that we have our buttons to launch hazard services. And everyone's familiar with the H with the cloud. That's your standard way to launch hazard services. We also have another quick launch button with the H with the tornado. And this is going to launch hazard services in the short view setting, and it's going to auto execute the storm track tool. And I'll get to that in a minute here, but first I want to just regularly launch hazard services. And you'll notice it comes up in hydrology all for me. So I am going to switch it over to short views and want to highlight the changes. Just as I went through in the slides, you're seeing these quick launch buttons. We have our changing our sites for service backup mode. We have our different drawing capabilities that have been broken out. And then we have our filter icons. So I changed to short views. I can change over to hydro. I can change over in one click to non-precipitation. And then this is replacing, before you had to go to setup, load settings, and then change your setting. And now you can do it with just one click. And if you're in short views, then you'll see that you have your quick launch button for the storm track tool. And before I get into that, I want to back out of this and show what this quick launch button does up here. So when I click this, it's going to launch hazard services. You're going to notice a little bit of a delay when I click this for the storm track tool actually launching. That's because the events need to load in the registry before we can switch to short views and launch the storm track tool. So the best practice for this, for hazard services and hazard service convective, is going to be once you launch hazard services, you probably want to keep it open while you're during warning operations, because there is that delay while you load events to the registry. So if I click this, you can see loading events from the registry down here on the right. And once that's done, it put me in short view setting and it launched the storm track tool. One thing I want to go over before I want to go over the staging dialog here, but before we do that, I wanted to point out the difference between this button and this button. Now that I have hazard services launched, this button up here essentially works as a quick launch for the storm track tool. I can click it and it'll just launch the storm track tool. One difference though between that button and this button down here is that if I'm in a different setting, so let's say I'm in non-precipitation and I want to very quickly in just one click switch to short views and launch the storm track tool, I can click this button up here and it's going to put me in short views and also launch the storm track tool. So I want to go through this dialog box here that first shows up when you launch the storm track tool. Remember before I mentioned the hazard first paradigm. This is what I mean when I say that. So when you launch the storm track tool, you get this dialog box and you're able to pick from any of these short views hazards. You can start out, if you know it's going to be a tornado warning going into it, you can start out with tornado warning and select that. There's also the ability to pre-select whether or not you are working with one storm or a line of storms. And then when you drag to your hazard location, you'll get either the dot or the line of storms. And then one thing I want to go through, especially before we get into actual data here, is this motionless option. So if I click motionless here and I drag my dot to hazard location, you'll notice I get a square and I don't get a track. And if I were to issue this hazard, I'm going to preview, you have to make a selection. You'll notice I get text saying that this storm was stationary. So we can default to motionless. And then there are several ways to get rid of this motionless action if you decide that, maybe you did this in error or the storm isn't actually motionless on second look. You can either select in the HID or deselect in the HID this motionless box. It will give you either your first guess storm motion if you haven't done anything yet, or if you select this button in the HID and then deselect it, it'll give you your most recent storm motion that you've had. Another way to get out of this motionless state is to just start going back a few frames. You'll notice this becomes an X here. And then I can drag this back. And now it gives me a motion. So I can just start organically tracking a storm. And that's another way to get out. Again, going back to motionless and then unchecking it, you can see it gave me my most recent storm motion. So that's the motionless option. So now that we've gone through those things, I want to back out of hazard services and I'm going to load up some data to actually start going through our demo. I'm going to load up some reflectivity and also storm relative motion data because I want to demonstrate that storm relative motion tool capability that I mentioned earlier. So I've loaded the case so that it's right before it gets to Elkhorn. So my plan is to kind of go through this, starting out with this storm and then coming back to this storm once it gets over by Elkhorn to do upgrades to a tornado emergency and demonstrate that capability. But to start out, I'm going to go ahead and launch hazard services and switch to short views. And then I'm going to launch the storm track tool. And since we know we know we want this to be a tornado warning, I'm going to go ahead and switch to tornado warning ahead of time. And then drag to my storm. The first thing I want to point out is that we're seeing this first gust storm motion that I mentioned. So if I start going back frames, you'll notice this already tracks pretty well with our storm. We haven't done any tracking yet, and this is the first gust storm motion it gave us. And I want to do a quick side-by-side with what track we would be given with WarnGen. So if I launch WarnGen and I drag directly on top of here of our current tracking dot, that's the polygon and track I get with WarnGen. And that's the same one you get every single time you launch WarnGen. So you can see the difference between the two, and that we're doing a much better job of tracking our storm right out of the box with hazard services. So I'm gonna unload, make hazard services editable again. I also want to point out here in the HID, let's just kind of go through our options in the HID a little bit. We have this speed and bearing readout. And this was something that was requested again during, I think it was requested during the OPG originally. And this was added as a result of forecaster feedback. But it will dynamically change as I start tracking my storm. You'll see it change here. If I give my storm a crazy fast motion, you'll notice that it highlights it in red. And the number in which that threshold is, it's configurable as well. So right now it's 55 knots, but that's configurable in hazard services. So I go back to having a reasonable storm motion. The next thing, so we just had a data layer update. You saw my screen flash and a new scan came in. And since we have not yet changed anything about our polygon, the polygon is tracking along with the storm and with the track. And so you'll see that happen as I am working through a lot of these cases. Every time you see a new radar frame come in, if we haven't edited this polygon yet, or whatever polygon we're working with, it'll track with the storm motion. The next thing I want to do, since we've gone through and changed our track a little bit here recently, is switch over to our storm relative motion data. And you'll notice up here, we have our speed and bearing readout as well. With WarnGen, every single time you drag your dot and change your track, this would change with it. But you'll notice that it doesn't match what we see in the HID currently. And with hazard services, that's by design. In order to get this to update, you would need to click this update SRM button. And now you'll see that they are the same. There's a little rounding, that's 18 knots, that's 19 knots, but they update. And then every time you move the dot, you need to click that button again. It also updates it automatically when you issue the hazard. And because we like everything to be very configurable in hazard services, if you want this to operate exactly like WarnGen and update every time you move the dot, that is also configurable. You can change a setting in the storm track tool, and it will behave exactly like WarnGen. We have it set up this way because it optimizes performance for hazard services to only have that update when you select the button. All right, I'm going to go back to radar data. I'm going to make some changes to my polygon just so that we can see when we next get a data layer update. And I'm gonna do the coffin shape to make Daniel happy. But we'll notice that the next time that we get a data layer update, the track will update, but the polygon will not change on us. Additionally, I want to go through the HID a little bit here. I'm going to keep it as a base IVW type for now. But to demonstrate some of these options in the HID, sorry, I'm not really paying attention to the chat, so I apologize. If somebody wants me to stop at any point, just raise your hand. That would probably be the easiest way to get my attention.
Emily, I've got the chat for now.
Great, thank you. So let's say I select emergency management reported a tornado. You'll notice that that changed something in the HID. Now I have this select to include hazard or damage report button that I can click. So that is, oh, we just had a data layer update, and so you'll notice that this box did not change when that happened. So I'm going to go ahead and at this point just issue this hazard. And then we can look at our products editor and make sure everything looks good here. Right. And in the HID, it's going to highlight it red because it's tornado warning, or not the HID, the console, sorry. And the spatial display, our outline, is also going to be red. Next thing I want to do is just move to issuing a standard severe thunderstorm warning. So I'm going to go with this storm down here. Drag my dot. One thing I want to point out is that you'll notice the footprint is a lot wider for a severe thunderstorm warning than it is for a tornado warning. If I were to switch to tornado warning, you see the footprint shrinks. That's also configurable. We had a lot of feedback from forecasters to decide what these should be out of the box, and this is kind of what we came up with, but it is all configurable. So if a specific office doesn't like the differences, they can change them. Let me go back to severe thunderstorm warning. I also want to point out this whole first guess motion. So remember before I mentioned that if you recently issued a new hazard within the last 15 minutes, it's going to adopt the same motion as the previous hazard. So I just want to select both of them at the same time here. If I go and toggle between the two, and this is also showing our multi-hazard management a little bit, but they essentially have the same storm motion. Again, there's rounding, but they have the same storm motion. So that's our first guess storm motion example for when it's adopting the last issued polygon. So I want to deselect and just have this one now. Also want to go through some of these smart CTAs that I mentioned. So remember I tried to issue this before. It starts out with a less than 50 mile per hour winds. If I try to issue it now, it's not going to let me. It's going to yell at me and say, hey, make a selection for severe. So then I can select, let's say I go 70 mile an hour winds. I want to just point out what CTAs I have right now, because I'm going to upgrade this. I'm going to actually go, let's go 80 mile an hour winds. Now I have to enter a location. So we'll pick Weston just as the example. But I have to enter a location, and because I picked a destructive wind, now I have different calls to action that I can select here. Additionally, if I select hail, let's go crazy and have really big hail here. Now I have hail CTAs that didn't appear before that I can now select that weren't available before. So I can make those selections. I'm gonna edit my polygon. And then just to give an example of how this is similar to Warren Gen. So now I've edited my polygon. If I start changing my track, my polygon didn't change, but when I hit the track button, it's gonna move it back to base it off of the storm track. So then it erases what I just did, but it's kind of resetting me based on my track. So I'm gonna just make some changes. I'm going to go ahead and issue this. Generator. Here we go. And you'll notice here, it cut this off. And the reason for that is because we have an inclusion fraction set right now. And so not enough of that county was included for it to meet the inclusion threshold. So when you're in the HID, you have update hazard hatched area. If I had selected that first before I issued it, I would have seen it right away. And that it was cutting that out. I could manually click to include that part of the county if I wanted to. And inclusion fractions are also configurable. I just wanted to point that out really fast. So the next thing I'm going to go on to is the line of storms tool. And so the closest thing we have to a line is probably this stuff over here. So I want to point out the line of storms tool specifically because it does operate a bit differently than Warren Gen, and it might be a little jarring at first, but it is pointed out in the training. So if you take the training that's available, it'll go through this in detail. So if I launch the storm track tool and I click line of storms, I'll get this big line. And in Warren Gen, you would be able to take one end of this line, drag it over, and take the other end, and then drag the other end over. And I know that that is a common workflow for a lot of people using Warren Gen. In hazard services, you have to initially drag the entire line. And the reason for this is because of that first guess storm motion that I keep talking about. So what you need to do is first just drag the whole line, kind of center it over your storm, let go, and then it's going to orient it for you. And it's going to, again, this has the same motion as our previous two hazards. So it's already going to pick up a pretty good motion here. And then once you let go of the drag new storm dot, you can now drag your line and orient it the way that you want to. So that is quite a big change from Warren Gen, but that might take a little getting used to. I also want to point out we have 3 vertices by default on our line. That is also configurable. You can have just 2, you can have 4, you can make that default be whatever you want it to be. So I am going to, I'm not going to spend too much time on this line just because, but I can drag the entire line to start working with the track. Pull things back. Maybe I want to grab those storms. You also notice that I have, this is the end. It's the same shape and it will change shape with this line. So if I add a new one, it's gonna show me what the line will look like over here in this dotted line. That was also something that was forecaster requested. So I'm going to go ahead and issue this. You'll notice down here, I am slightly outside of my CWA. So that's going to clip out, especially if I click update hazard hatched area. So that clips out along the border. So I'm going to make a couple selections here. And you'll notice our text is gonna mention that it's a line of storms. Issue. All right. The next thing I want to do is come back to our big event over here that's about to go through the Elkhorn area. So I'm going to select my hazard again. We'll notice that, you know, it's been trucking. It's all the way over by Elkhorn now. So if I hit the track button, it's gonna redo my polygon based off of the current track. I want to also point out that we have, and this is a little hard to see with the overlay, but on the radar data here, but if you can see it better over here, this is the previous track outline. So this is our previous, not previous track, previous polygon outline. This is also configurable. You can make these lines thicker. You can change the color, that sort of, to make it more visible based on storm track tool. And then I want to, edit my polygon a bit. We don't need all of these. And I really want to make sure that I'm going to drag this, even if it doesn't make a ton of sense, I'm going to drag this out of this county, because what I want to demonstrate next is a partial cancellation. So here I'm using the previously issued polygon to know where I am. Gonna drag dots. Update my track. And now I'm going to update to a tornado emergency. Again, this is replacing frame text. So I put my location in here. And then I can throw in some hail. And you'll notice that now I have a CTA for tornado emergency. It gets auto-selected when I select tornado emergency. And so I'm going to do update hazard hatched area. And then I'm going to select preview. And when I hit preview, I get my staging dialog. Now this is going to be, we know we removed a county here. So we now get to select our ending option. So now we can see we have our ending option. We don't have any frame text to deal with at all. And then we're going to go ahead and issue this. And right away, you'll notice that my outline is purple now. So I upgraded it to a tornado emergency. So now it's purple. And it's purple in the console and on the spatial display. That was also a forecaster requested feature. And it is also configurable. The color is. So now that we've gone through our tornado emergency, I want to shift topics a little bit to proposing a hazard. And this can be used for potentially storms entering your CWA or storms exiting your CWA that you want neighboring CWAs to be aware of. But in this scenario, I'm going to use these storms that are coming into our CWA down here and issue a severe thunderstorm warning or propose a severe thunderstorm warning. So I can select my wind. I'm not going to spend too much time on the track with this because I just want to show what happens when I hit propose. You see this turns into an outline of a dashed outline, and it will now be visible to this other CWA. And then I can just leave this here and start working on other hazards and let this continue to update until it comes in all the way into my CWA and I want to issue my hazard. And it'll keep updating. So as long as I don't mess with the polygon is going to update right along with the track every time I get a new data layer update or a radar scan come in. So I'm just going to kind of leave this alone for a minute. And I want to shift to showing multi-hazard management. So I can select multiple hazards at the same time. So I have this proposed hazard selected. I can now select by hitting Control or Shift. I can select more than one hazard at once. So I'm going to select all of my hazards just to demo this. So now I have every hazard that I've issued selected at the same time. And you'll see tabs have appeared in the HID. So I can click through those tabs and make changes to these hazards. This is also new. If you end up with more hazards selected than you can see on your HID, you can click through them using these tab buttons. This was also something that was requested during the ATAN that we currently have going on for convective hazard services that we implemented recently. And then I just wanted to show I can change my track. So I've got this one selected. So I can start changing my track here. I can start changing my track here. I want to make sure I don't get rid of a count here. Oh, so my box. So I can make changes to all of these hazards. And then if I want to, I can issue them. And now since I have this pending proposed hazard over here, it's going to issue this one too. And for now, we're just going to let it, it's enough. It's a polygon is inside of our CWA, so it'll issue it as well. But I want to show how you could update all your hazards essentially at the same time. So I hit preview and you'll see I have multiple tabs in my product editor. So I can go through all of them and make sure everything looks good for each one. And then you'll see down here I have issue 4. So it's going to issue all 4 of these hazards at once. So that is, and then it actually issued this hazard, which is sort of coming in. So that is multi-hazard management. Here's a good example why the tornado warning expires in 10 minutes. We get our pop-up telling us that. And you can see that in the console, the time to expiration has changed to red. The next thing I want to do is show you how we can kind of jump between these different settings here and what that looks like. So I'm going to issue an FFW convective. So I'm going to switch to the hydro perspective. And you'll notice I still have my highlighted filter icons in yellow. It's going to highlight short fuse and convective at the same time because these are technically short fuse and convective hazards. But I'm in hydro, and you'll notice I still have the storm track tool quick launch icon. If I click on this, the only option that I have to issue is a flash flood warning. So I can't be in the hydro setting and accidentally issue a tornado warning, for example. It's only going to let me do a flash flood warning. And there's two ways that I can issue a flash flood warning now. I can use the storm track tool, or I can draw it by hand. I'm going to just drag down to a storm over here, and I'm going to show what this looks like. It's going to be a crazy, ridiculous looking track because my default is 3 hours for duration, and these storms are moving pretty fast. So most likely people are going to use the hand draw feature for FFW Convective, but it was requested that this be available to use the storm track tool with. If you wanted to, you could change the duration and get a more reasonable polygon. We could also use this motionless checkbox. So if the storm was actually motionless, you could do it this way. So that's one way to issue an FFW convective with hazard services. The other way is to just use the drawing tool, which is probably what most people will do.
Hey, Emily, we have about 8 minutes left. Just wanted to let you know.
Oh boy, okay. I'll go faster. So I'm just going to quickly issue this. And then I also want to issue a, go back to short views. I'm going to issue a dust storm warning, which makes no sense, but just bear with me. Just for demo purposes, because I want to go through these filter icons really fast. So right now I'm in short views. If I have, let's say I have winter weather hazards going or something, and also short views, and I only care about my severe thunderstorms and my tornado warnings. I don't want to see this FFW convective and this DSW. I only care about those. I can click the convective status or setting, and it's going to filter those out. I can go back and see them in short views. So I can go back and forth really easily to make sure that, mostly for situational awareness, if I'm in the convective status, I can still issue any short views hazard I want to, because I'm technically still in the short views category, which is a little confusing, the details of that, but essentially this provides for extra situational awareness. And we can see our icons are still lighting up in yellow. The last thing that I want to go through is ending a hazard. And I just want to show this because we really have made an effort to get rid of as much framed text as we can. So if I go in and right click on a hazard, select end this, and you get your ending option. If I were to preview this without selecting anything, then I do get frame text. But generally, you would go in and you would select your ending options, preview, and issue your hazard this way. So, and then just as a quick demo here, we can see that our tornado warning is ending in the next 5. It's in ending status. It's bold, so that we know it's in an ending status, and it's still got its red time to expiration. So that's a good thing to point out as well. I think that that's it. I think that I've covered all of the things that I want to cover. So we have a few minutes left, so we can open this up for questions. Should I stop sharing? Or I can go back to the slideshow actually. Because I did want to give a little wrap up here. If you guys want to get involved, there are lots of ways to do so. You could contact myself or Taylor. We always have cloud instances that are available where you can jump on and start playing with the latest software. We have canned radar data similar to what you see here that you can basically do a pretend warning operations practice run. We every so often we'll have our forecaster assessment tests. And then we also have various test bed evaluations. We've done the operational proving grounds for Convective twice. And then I also really want to point out, we are currently conducting an ATAN for Hazard Services Convective. And I believe if people want to join, they can request to join. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback so far, and we've actually added new features as a result of the current ATAN. And then I'll end with this slide. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from the various assessment tests and the OPG and from the ATAN as well. So I wanted to just highlight those. So that is it. I will pass it over maybe to Dan, or if anyone has any questions, to just raise their hands. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, this is Mike. Thanks, Emily. Great job. If anyone has any questions, like Emily said, just raise your hand or put it in the chat. Looks like Taylor has answered all the questions so far, so.
Steve.
Anyway, that was very good. Thank you. I was wondering about the initial polygon. Is it possible to have it start as a pentagon or even a plume like what you were drawing?
That's a great question. I know that's something that is something people would be interested in. The most configuration that can happen for that so far is just the buffer between like the distance from the latest tracking dot to the edge of the polygon, and then your main tracking dot in the back of the polygon, and like the buff and how wide, like how much of a like cone shape it is. We don't actually have the ability to add extra vertices to start with on the initial polygon, but it is something that I keep hearing more and more and more requests for. So that's definitely something that we can look into adding if it's super popular. So I think it would definitely be possible.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we're an ATAN site, so we're still messing around with it, and I may give you some feedback on that if we can try it sometime. Thank you.
Yeah, if you're an ATAN site and you want something like that, submitting a ticket and you know, for it, even if it's not a bug that you're finding, like we have a list of like nice to have things that we want to get to when we have time. So Matthew asked, is there a way to configure, or wait, no, I'm way far up. Sorry. I scrolled up in the chat. Oops.
Yeah, last call for questions.
Yeah, and if anyone has any additional questions in the future that they don't want to ask right now, feel free to email Emily or myself.
Good question, Jeffrey and Kathleen. So that is there is an unfortunate answer to that question. Is we're kind of tied to the Red Hat 8 update for this version of Hazard Services to go out, and so we're sort of in line waiting for that to happen. And so the more that gets pushed back, the further this being fully implemented operationally gets pushed back. Just sort of outside of our control. We're not super happy with it, but I think if people want to get more involved and have use of this operationally, the best thing to do might be to join the ATAN, because sites, that is a way that sites are. We haven't had people start actually issuing things operationally at ATAN sites yet, but we're hoping sometime this spring that it will happen. So that might be the fastest way for people to get their hands on this. There are not with Hazard Services Convective. The question was if there are any other tests coming up, such as the OPG or FAT or other test bed. there is a hazardous weather test going on right now for other aspects of hazard services, but not this specifically.
That will probably wrap it up. Thanks, Emily, Taylor, and Dan for the presentation. Great job. Also like to thank everyone for joining us. That will conclude our webinar for today. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.